What's up, everybody? So, David McKerracher from Theory Underground here. Just wanted to give you a quick little rundown on what I'm about to share with you all. This is where Nance and I began reading Gary Gnosko's work on McLuhan and Baudrillard. And so I'm just going to get right to it. But first, I've got to say that this is from last October 2023. We have this huge problem at Theory Underground that is a backlog of content that, at this point, I've got like 50 videos that I would like to publish, but they all need like little things like messages at the beginning, and they have to get, new PSAs added on the end. And I don't edit anything, you know what I mean? Like, I don't have the time, energy for that. And I don't cater to people who care too much about polish. Right. So I'm only doing this for the realist motherfuckers, the people who are workers with earbuds, who give a shit about expanding their mind and getting deeper into texts instead of just hearing people babble, babble, babble. And so, yeah, let's cut the babble bullshit and get to it. Right. Well, I still have to do a little bit of polish. I still have to put a little bit of PSA into these things. These public service announcements give you a sense for what's coming up. And I know that some of you feel real, sad when you miss out on opportunities for things like the writing workshop that just started today, or, Brian's introduction to Illich course. People last year who missed out on the idea of the university course with Brian and Ann. Missed out on an opportunity to really get to know Nance and Philip, like at the ground floor of Theory Underground. But like, I don't want to just use FOMO to try to drive clicks or try to get signups for courses. That's not the point. The point is that it's real. Like, people really do want to get involved and are looking for ways to get more involved. And look, some of you courses aren't going to work for you. It's not your thing. There's already so much free content on the podcast and YouTube for Theory Underground. What's the point? You've got books, backlogs of Theory Underground books you can get off of Audible that you can't even catch up with, right? And so for some of you, it doesn't matter. I don't want you to feel FOMO for that at all. But for people who are looking to get more involved, I do kind of assume that, a lot of people only see 1 out of 10 of the things that go up on this channel. And so I do have to include PSAs for all y'all. So, people aren't going to read newsletters. That's not a reliable way forward. And so somewhere halfway through this episode, you will hear a plug for the intro to Illich course. And then at the end, you'll get to hear the how to get involved at Theory Underground, as well as a thing about the upcoming conference, TUCon 2024, at the end of October. We are now accepting proposals, and the cutoff for proposals is going to be June 16th, which is coming up in 8 days. So that's coming up really freaking soon. So get on it. All right, everybody. Thank you so much. Hope you enjoy this exegetical reading session that we did while driving. It was a great time. Anne is enjoying her own thing there in the back seat. She only really chimes in a couple times whenever we're doing these exegeticals. This tour across the United States was a lot more productive of things like exegetical reading sessions and sitting in the back seat, listening to music and reading and kind of doing all that kind of stuff than was our travel in Europe, because I think, both Nance and Anne, they're the kind of people who are logistically minded. And so it's one thing to know where you're going and be driving there for 8 hours. You just kind of settle into the car ride eventually. And it's another thing to be dealing with trains and planes all over Europe. I'm the only person who seems to be able to tune out the stress of all that and just, chill wherever I am. But that's mostly because Anne and Nance were doing all of the logistical thinking for me on the European tour. I was dealing with the people and the organizational stuff. They were dealing with the literal practical day-to-day. How do we get from point A to point B? So shout out to both Anne and Nance. Touring the US was so much fun with them. Touring Europe, also awesome. So yeah, that's the thing about Theory Underground. We're coming to a city near you. So while you listen to this, remember, we're driving around, and you should have this image of us driving around, because you should always have this image of us coming to a city near you, because we are, motherfuckers. All right, peace. All right, everybody, what's up?
Hold on. What's up? We're reading McLuhan and Baudrillard. Let me get back because this...
So I'll just talk for a second. So McLuhan and Baudrillard, we're looking for the actual author title and stuff like that. But this is very important. All right. McLuhan tends to be framed as the optimist. Baudrillard, the pessimist. We either are neither or are bipolar between these two things or are simultaneously both. And so thinking McLuhan with Baudrillard is very important, but people famously misunderstand McLuhan and Baudrillard separately. So when a person takes them and puts them together, the question is, what's it going to be like? And that's what we're going to find out with you all.
As we read McLuhan and Baudrillard by Janowski.
It says the Masters of Implosion.
Gary Gnosko, the Masters of Implosion.
Gary Gnosko. Let's do it.
All right, give me a minute to skip to the first chapter. I'm going to skip the introduction.
I'll just say a couple of things. First of all, I have read a little bit of this. I don't remember it. I think there was like a line that I remember wanting to quote later. It's kind of like the calling Baudrillard Dark McLuhan. I think I got that from this. And so it's good to know that somebody else in the game sees that. Outside of that, it's not like we've done our first reading of this. Normally, we don't do exegeticals of something that we haven't read for the first time. This is a special exception.
Special road dispensation. We were driving, but we're also getting work done. This is going to be a contribution to the critical media theory cohort. It's not going to be an exegesis. It's going to be kind of a reading and kind of a meta-fusion of just all the threads that are always already there.
Kind of the way Adam did some straight-through readings where he did stop and kind of touch on something, but it was really restrained. That's kind of more what we're doing here. And I think it's kind of like an award for all of our hard work. We deserve it. We deserve to get something new injected into our brains and to do that together instead of having to listen to the robot reader. Nance has a much better voice, and so...
Let's get to it. Chapter 1, Before the Letter. It is commonplace for both French and English critics to mention the relationship between the writings of McLuhan and Barthes in the course of their reflections on popular culture. One could catalog an impressive inventory of reminders of the parallel concerns of The Mechanical Bride, McLuhan 1951, and Mythologies, Barthes 1957. It needs to be kept in mind, however, that it was the question of McLuhan's relation to the practices of structuralism that often animated such comparative observations, and that Barthes was not always the first figure suggested to French readers of McLuhan. In terms of reading practices, this meant it was the work of Claude Lévi-Strauss that came to mind in the first instance. In 1966, the year McLuhan's writings first received widespread critical exposure in France, the journal founded by Georges Bataille, Critique, published a review by Paul Reisman in 1966 of the English editions of the Gutenberg Galaxy and Understanding Media, while Maurice Nadeau's La Quinzaine Littéraire carried an interview with McLuhan by their Canadian correspondent, Catan, 1966, once again. In addition, by 66, Barthes had, in fact, begun to turn away from the structural analysis of narrative. Reisman, in 1966, thought that traditional social scientists would have difficulty with McLuhan's mosaic method since it was unlike the methodologies with which they were accustomed to working. Moreover, it would be pointless to judge McLuhan's work on the basis of such methodologies since his debt was to literature rather than sociology. For Reisman, McLuhan was more of a novelist sketching the personalities of technologies than a sociologist. Even so, Reisman believed that McLuhan left too much to the reader's imagination in his infatuation with collecting and juxtaposing quotations and ideas. Despite this literary debt, McLuhan is not exempt from the so-called error of thinking that the simple spatio-temporal juxtaposition of things, pseudo-Einsteinian approach, constitutes a sufficiently powerful analysis of their relations. if social science errs on Newtonian rather than quantum grounds in the pursuit of rigor and exactitude, McLuhan stretches the limits and coherence of social Einsteinism as a critical approach relevant to understanding social change. What is interesting about this criticism is that McLuhan's method is thought to suffer from the very thing that would win it praise a few years later in some Anglo-American circles. Reisman's critical discussion of the mosaic method itself roams freely across the disciplines. He refers to it in psychoanalytic terms as a chain of free associations, and treats it as a biological entity whose parts, like the amputated limbs of certain organisms, may engender new organisms since the part contains details of the whole. You want to move that? No? Okay.
I think this is good. What I don't like is when the camera's like gonna slip or whatever. Or
Yeah.
you have to worry about it. This is quite easy. I mean, for people who are like, oh, you shouldn't be driving like while you're holding the camera. Okay, we respect that. Most people maybe shouldn't try this at home, but I've been
experts.
I've been a blue collar like driver for like multiple companies for fucking the better part of like 6 years total, and I don't know. I can drive. I often drive with my knees.
Yeah.
So.
Not that often.
Well, sorry, we've got a little contradiction in the back seat. Shut up! I'm just kidding.
Yeah, David and Nan's right here, like reading books while driving with their knees on the steering wheel, typing, editing.
I usually
while
read
driving.
while driving, yeah.
We toned it down.
Yeah.
But don't worry, kids, we're experts. Do not try this at home.
Yeah, exactly.
Unless you're ready, unless you're over it, unless you're like, fuck it, I'm going out with a bang. Then what better way to go out than reading McLuhan and Baudrillard on the I-85 or whatever the fuck road
That's
we're
not
on.
how I'd like to go out, so. please.
We're on our way to Kansas City from Chicago, in case you're interested.
Yeah, because we're doing the damn thing. All right. Reisman situates McLuhan in relation to two key French figures. Like Jacques Ellul, McLuhan takes critical notice of the mechanization and dehumanization of persons and the disappearance of individualism since the Renaissance. While Ellul bases his social criticism and vision of the future on the extension of his general concept of technique, McLuhan considers media of communication to be vehicles of radical change, and this change will be marked by the reemergence of a healthy and wholesome tribalism. The second figure to whom Reisman refers is Levi-Strauss. The analyses found in Understanding Media are in agreement with the spirit of the times, Reisman thinks, despite the unverifiability of the hypotheses advanced in this book. The insight into the inherent message of the structure of the media of our age suggests to Reisman that the point of attack of McLuhan and Levi-Strauss is formally the same, even though their goals and methods are different. McLuhan and Levi-Strauss do not meet by chance. 4. These two researchers have recognized independently of one another that the structure of communication also contains a message, and it is often the message which is the most important. But for Levi-Strauss, the importance of this message, i.e. rules of kinship and marriage, assure the exchange of women between groups, just as linguistic rules assure the communication of messages. Is that it reveals at the level of the unconscious the structure of the human mind, while, for McLuhan, this message has a certain effect on the mind of man without him being aware of it. It is in light of this difference that Reisman criticizes McLuhan on the ground that he has an inadequate concept of the nature of man and cannot explain whether or not his man receives the messages inherent to the structure of the media. McLuhan recognizes this problem without solving it, turning instead to the observation, for instance, that it is not easy to explain the fact that the transformative power of the media can be ignored by so many. In Reisman's staging of an early encounter between McLuhan and structuralism, McLuhan proves to be an unworthy partner for Levi-Strauss. Read retrospectively, this was a sign of things to come, since McLuhan's French and English readers would struggle to find a mode of analysis into which he would fit with a minimum of theoretical violence. The terms of McLuhan's relationship to structuralism would be drafted again and again without, I want to show, much success. It is in this context that Barthes would emerge as a fellow traveler whose path through literature to the social paralleled that of McLuhan, and whose relationship to structuralism was troubled enough to allow for flexibility in the comparison. Style supplants method as the common measure of both men. Nominating Barthes. Writing in the daily newspaper, the Toronto Star, in the summer of 1978, the Canadian journalist Robert Fulford asked his readers to consider the complexities of a recent book by Barthes, Roland Barthes, under the provocative title of Meet Francis Marshall McLuhan. Aside from the title, Fulford said little concrete about the relationship between McLuhan and Barthes, dwelling instead upon the impenetrability of Barthes' thought and the perils of an intellectual celebrity who has been canonized for writing against the canon, as it were. Fulford's single reference to McLuhan read, like Marshall McLuhan, Barthes sees the way that you express yourself as potentially more important than what you actually say. Barthes sees a great historic drama in the attempts of various underclasses to imitate the style of those who have power. The Barthesian scheme of the weak stealing language from the sites of power, which he expressed in Mythologies, as the ubiquity of bourgeois ideology in French society of the 1950s, and the necessity of all other social classes to borrow from the bourgeoisie, became for Fulford a way of situating Barthes' own intellectual development and rise to international intellectual fame. This modest newspaper article provides an early example of the rhetoric of the search for the French McLuhan. It is not only that McLuhan and Barthes shared an interest in popular culture and the analysis of forms of expression. Rather, Fulford implies that the relation between McLuhan and Barthes is based upon the impenetrability of their respective writings. In short, the writings of French intellectuals are just as impenetrable as the work of McLuhan, and equally insightful, if not audacious. From gurus, we always get enigmas, Fulford wrote some years earlier in the Star, September 1971, referring to McLuhan, among others. Meet Francis Marshall McLuhan did not go unnoticed by McLuhan. A few weeks after its publication, he wrote a letter to the editor of the Toronto Star in response to Fulford. Deepening the connection between himself and Barthes, McLuhan wrote that Barthes once asked me to collaborate with him on a book. Although McLuhan did not elaborate on his contact with Barthes, he was flattered to be placed by Fulford in the company of Barthes. I shall elaborate on McLuhan's meetings with Barthes and the myth of their ill-fated collaborative project later in this chapter. In the meantime, and despite the remarks of the editors of McLuhan's letters, for whom the fact that Fulford did not explicitly refer to McLuhan's work as impenetrable provides a posthumous line of defense, McLuhan himself drew the obvious conclusion. Fulford sees Barthes as impenetrable as myself. McLuhan specifies that the special character of his impenetrability results from his study of effects rather than his theorizing, to use other words. He claimed to study patterns without theories. Equally significant, however, was McLuhan's naming of Barthes' work. As for Barthes, he is a phenomenologist, that is, one who tries to see the patterns in things while also playing along with the dominant theory of his world. I will use this misidentification of Barthes as the occasion for a reflection on McLuhan's relationship with structuralism.
So McLuhan's issue with Barthes is that he's a too phenomenologist, and that he defines that as
studying patterns while playing along
with the structure of what is
with the dominant theory.
The dominant theory, playing along with the dominant theory.
So trying to be critical, but not getting enough distance from it, not really trying to get outside of it.
Okay.
But just like trying to study ocean currents from beneath the surface of the ocean rather than getting outside of it.
Okay, McLuhan.
I will use this misidentification of Barthes as the occasion for a reflection on McLuhan's relationship with structuralism. I just read that. In exploring this relation, two perspectives need to be distinguished. First, some of McLuhan's French readers aligned his work with multidisciplinary structuralist research as it developed through the late 1950s and into the 1960s. McLuhan was either a precursor of structuralism or a fellow traveler. Finding McLuhan a place in a recognizable stream of research was a normalizing and legitimizing gesture, since it provided a ready-made context of understanding for his work, even if this contextualization relied upon a negative criterion such as impenetrability to make the connection. The appeal to structuralism as a means of connecting Barthes and McLuhan is even more strained if it is recalled that by the time of the publication of Roland Barthes' Roland Barthes, Barthes had abandoned the technical demands of structuralist method and disavowed the orthodoxies of literature for an autobiographical writing in which he treated himself as an effective language. I will use this misidentification of Barthes as the occasion for a reflection on McLuhan's relationship with structuralism. So, repeat of the sentence. In exploring this relation to perspective. What? Oh, I went back.
Oh.
What the fuck? Okay. Second, McLuhan's own understanding of structuralism and phenomenology resulted from his translation of general orientations in these areas into the interpretive double of figure and ground. On the face of it, Barthes was certainly not a phenomenologist, yet any reader of the essay which grounds theoretically Barthes' little cultural sketches or mythologies, myth today, in mythologies, would admit that his description of the biplanar structure, full of meaning yet formally empty, of the mythical signifier of the second-order semiological system of mythology is richly phenomenological. The final term of the signifier, signified, sign triumvirate, becomes the first term or signifier of the mythical system. Barthes describes how myths get a hold of first-order linguistic signification for its own purposes. Form plays a game of hide-and-seek with meaning. Holding meaning at a distance and in turn hiding from it, form also preys parasitically upon meaning by emptying it of history, reality, and contingency. Indeed, in an earlier book, Michelet par lui-même, Barthes had undertaken a phenomenologically inspired description of selected existential thematics pertaining to the sensations and substances at work in Michelet's imaginative histories. These observations do not commit one to McLuhan's position, since neither of the two Barths, to which critics commonly refer, were, strictly speaking, phenomenologists. To use slightly more positive terms, McLuhan's naming of Barthes was not as ridiculous as it first appeared. Calling all structuralists. In the late 1960s in Quebec, the translator, writer, and editor, Jean Père, had attempted to identify McLuhan as an estranged parent of the structuralists, rather than a precursor or product of structuralism. While Père developed the figure of McLuhan as an amateur structuralist, his efforts at establishing his next of kin quickly unraveled with the qualification that McLuhan is not really a structuralist, since he is neither part of this diverse movement nor a disciple of one of its figures or methodological variations. As the figure of McLuhan and structuralism began to lose touch completely, Père sought a safe common, albeit vague, ground. McLuhan became a contemporary of the practitioners of structuralism. Pére's final figure expressing the relationship between McLuhan and structuralism is of a circle inside of a polygon, suggesting that the relationship of the former with the latter is tangential, rather than being totally oppositional. This would not be the least feeble attempt to unite McLuhan and structuralism. Praising structuralism for both its housekeeping skills and its ability to mirror mass-mediated confusion, Edward Said set this method in and against the North American sprawl of McLuhanism. Said mentioned nothing, however, about the spread of McLuhanism among the Francophones. Croker referred to McLuhan as structuralist before his time, picking up the pieces of a long series of disjointed efforts to rearrange a marriage that was, from the outset, made somewhere other than in heaven. During the early 1970s, James M. Curtis addressed the issue of McLuhan's relationship with French structuralism in 2 articles, the first of which focused on Lévi-Strauss and the second on Barthes. Curtis' hyperbolic importation of McLuhan into his review of the languages of criticism in the sciences of man provides the occasion for the claim, echoing Reisman, that McLuhan and Lévi-Strauss share almost everything. What Lévi-Strauss and McLuhan share in particular is an oracular style, a disregard for academic conventions, and a wide public impact, a combination which naturally arouses their more traditional colleagues to a near apoplectic frenzy. Their relationship is based first and foremost on style, one marked by ambiguity and portentousness. Beyond this issue, Levi-Strauss and McLuhan are said to share an attitude. Their respective writings have had a wide and major impact. They have both been the target of their colleagues' outbursts. Only the matter of style opens the door ever so slightly to a consideration of the relationship between their writings. But since the appeal to style in this instance remains undefined and vague, we should expect little from such textual considerations. While the family resemblances first postulated by Perret dissolved into abstract geometrical lines, Curtis frames his sense of resemblance with the wide borders of a general sociology of knowledge production, in which references are made to the reception of interdisciplinary work in a disciplined academy and the phenomenon of university professors who become popular sages. It follows for Curtis that two innovative thinkers who share everything, but may in fact have nothing in common, may be said both to practice a certain brand of structuralism full of creative play. This structuralism is more poetic than analytical, and it entails the implosion of the subject-object distinction, the end of the primacy of empiric evidence, and the collapse of distinct disciplines. These are the main features of the post-Newtonian world of the human sciences. For Curtis, both Levi-Strauss and McLuhan are in these terms practitioners of social Einsteinism. These features allow Curtis to apply to McLuhan's Understanding Medium, a book he admires for its puns and non-sequential analysis, what Eugenio Donato wrote of Levi-Strauss, le qui et le qui. It is impossible in a work such as this to separate myth and literature, science and interpretation, analysis and criticism. Ultimately, Curtis will posit the convergence of the linguistic concept of structure, anthropological findings, modern literary criticism, and the interests of McLuhan and others in contemporary society in the study of myth. Taken together with the matter of style, Curtis' emphasis on myth facilitates the inclusion of Barthes in his stable of French structuralists, whose work lends itself to somewhat banal comparisons with that of McLuhan. In his second essay, Curtis is content to rehearse the features of the conceptual universe of social Einsteinism, but in relation to McLuhan and Barthes. The work of McLuhan and Barthes is, he claims at one point, postmodernist, and the consideration of their work elicits a better understanding of the postmodernist situation as a whole. Here, postmodernist seems to be synonymous with social Einsteinism,
which is this author's term for relativism.
Seems to be. It is not at all evident that one can be both structuralist and postmodernist, since the latter has a particularly active component of anti-structuralism. Further, Curtis compares passages, I don't know about that, by the way, but whatever. Curtis compares passages...
Which
you can't be a structuralist and a postmodernist? I disagree with that.
That's kind of weird, yeah.
But whatever.
I think, so he had
he's
said...
using postmodernism wrong.
And he said something about the housekeeping skills of the structuralists. I think it just means people who are trying to understand complex things in a systematic way. And then he's thinking about postmodernism as a loosey-goose, whatever. Doesn't have a method.
Well, there's the postmodern, there's postmodernity. Modernity itself. And I think structuralism is grappling with that. So I think necessarily you can't have one without the other, I think. But anyway. Further, Curtis compares passages in Raymond Picard's New Criticism, or New Fraud, 1969, and Sidney Finkelstein's Sense and Nonsense of McLuhan, 1968, as instances of two virulent attacks on Barthes and McLuhan which were provoked by their similar styles of presentation. These venomous responses enable Curtis to hold together McLuhan and Barthes by means of external criteria, here quite explicitly in terms of provocations. Curtis' interest in style is at times strikingly McLuhanesque, since he is concerned with the effects of non-sequential writing rather than with analyzing its features. He is content not to face the matter of style squarely, but rather to sustain McLuhan's resemblance to Barthes on the most general level, since they are both interested in contemporary society, and this interest does not work itself out in Marxian terms. This unanalyzed anti-Marxism clears the ground between Barthes and McLuhan so that Curtis may listen to the echoes between sentences from Barthes' Mythologies and McLuhan's understanding media. Although these sounds are not discordant, the formal relations between Barthes' cultural sketches and McLuhan's series of exhibits in The Mechanical Bride are in agreement. Style is, it seems, nothing more than this kind of agreement. Any reader of these two texts can master style by noting the obvious. Mass-produced objects such as cars and toys, including certain materials, such as plastics, as well as performances, exhibitions, films, food and drink, and sporting events, all yield their mythological significations to Barthes. His investigations into myth often commence with representations of events and objects in popular French print media. Women's magazines such as Elle, newspapers like Le Figaro, and glossy news magazines along the lines of Paris Match are, for Barthes, treasure troves of myths. The Barthesian mythologist may study anything, since myth touches and corrupts everything. Even those objects that resist myth are ideal prey. Likewise, McLuhan's commentaries on the folkloric landscapes of everyday objects are inspired by advertisements, the organization of newspapers, comic books, popular magazines, Reader's Digest, Time, Life, Fortune, and so on, detective novels, and various manifestations of the ligature of sex and technology, drum majorette, chorus line, glamour girl, etc.
Which, by the way, I just have to interject. In The Final Commodity, a book that Theory Underground is supposedly publishing, Michael Downs says, and I say supposedly just because we were supposed to have it on this tour, but I don't know when it's going to come out now. But anyway, in The Final Commodity, he says that it was Sartre who taught him that he could philosophize looking at anything. Just sitting in a room, looking at anything, he could do philosophy about that thing. And it was like Sartre who really unlocked that for him. Žižek does that too, whatever. Heidegger and Marx helped. But I just have to say, Barthes and McLuhan are that distilled down to that's it. Like that is like fundamentally their mode. And I think that this idea that McLuhan was not a theorist is greatly overstated. He doesn't want to be seen as a theorist, but he obviously had a theory.
Yeah.
His theory was that humans have their senses unified, generally speaking, and always have, and that modern forms of technology mediate consciousness in ways that make it so that some of our sensory apparatuses are enhanced while others are diminished, that they get segregated, and we become compartmentalized.
Yeah, compartmentalized. They become decoupled from each other and necessarily decoupled from reality.
That is a theory, and that is not the dominant theory of his time. And so he was doing theory, and anyone who tries to pull this "no, he wasn't" thing, it's like, no, come on, separate him from what he said. He doesn't want to be seen as one. That's not the same thing as saying he's not one. But anyway, with all that said, he and Barthes are perfect examples of people who do this thing, which is just like, I'm going to have like some kind of a general set of operating assumptions, and then I'm going to go across all these different fields of knowledge and just through pop culture and just kind of everything around me. And I'm just going to, it's kind of like poeticizing existence, but you're doing it a little bit more theoretically.
Yeah, there's more rigor and there's more commitment. Again, you're not just poeticizing. I mean, maybe that's the mode, but there's more to it.
Right.
And again, that the commitments from the get-go.
Commitment to understanding.
Yeah. And the framework, like having a structure through which to do it. It's not all just this rhizomatic, loosey-goosey. Look at me, I'm a tree.
Right? And just, okay, so real quick, he didn't even say, oh, So this book is about Baudrillard and McLuhan, but I'm going to spend the first chapter talking about Barthes because instead he just dives in.
Yeah.
It's like he took an essay on this topic and then just threw it in at the beginning. And I just want to put this out there. Even if you do want to combine a bunch of essays and you say, this does go with that, as an author, you should give a little roadmap. And
it might have been in the introduction.
Oh shit!
Introduction.
Oh, I didn't know. I didn't know you skipped the introduction.
Yeah, skip the introduction. So
well, let me say the thing then. Barthes is very relevant here, not just because he was early to this game that Baudrillard kind of like builds up on, but actually Barthes was on his thesis committee. All right, so Barthes was on Baudrillard's thesis committee. So was Bourdieu and Lefebvre. And Lefebvre, he wrote The Critique of Everyday Life. It's a really fat book. I haven't actually read it. But what kind of unifies Bourdieu, Lefebvre, and Barthes is that all three of them are, in their own ways, doing this thing where they're looking at kind of everything cultural and then kind of doing this, drilling down into it. And they all have their own ways of doing it, but Baudrillard kind of had all three of them on his thesis committee. And I think that really set him up to take the best aspects of all three of those thinkers and McLuhan and roll that into some other position. Oh, and he also rolls Marcel Mauss into it, which is very important. Probably also some Lacan and Bataille. So yeah. Baudrillard's kind of like an excellent place to go as in terms of like unlocking all those other guys and also showing us why they're relevant. Like, I care more about those thinkers because of Baudrillard than anything else.
Yeah.
So this is all relevant. I didn't know we skipped the introduction. That makes a lot more sense now because I was like, wow, I can't believe he just dives in like this.
And I don't know if it is in there or not because I didn't read it.
Yeah.
But we can read it later. You should read it too. But
that's right.
Yeah. But readers of Barthes would be familiar with his early contributions to Marxist scholarship in the pages of the journals Esprit, Combat, and later Arguments on topics as diverse as the theater of Bertolt Brecht and Le Nouveau Roman. No reader of Mythologies would have overlooked one of the key figures of Barthes' political semiology of myth, inversion. Armed with Marx's image, then, Barthes read the myths of France as it became a consumer society in terms of the processes of bourgeois ideology which gave a universal standing to their particular historical status. The political task of the mythologist was to upend the mythical message by revealing how bourgeois ideology nominates itself while contaminating every event and object. Ultimately for Barthes, semiology too became a myth whose distortions in the name of a science of science and a science of literature required unmasking. I do not mean to suggest that Barthes' semiology retained the political concerns of mythologies. Although Barthes did not develop a political economy or even sociology of the sign in the manner of Baudrillard, he employed the concept of a deciding group that influenced individual use by controlling the language, for instance, of the fashion system. In Barthes' Elements of Semiology, first published as an essay in 1964, use is guided by the fabricated languages, or logotechniques, of the deciding groups, regardless of whether these groups are narrow and highly trained or diffuse and anonymous. The restriction of speech results from socio-semiotic determinations at the level of the system. This is one of the features of Barthes' semiology that is often overlooked. The question of style is not so much a matter of the impact of McLuhan's and Barthes' rhetorics as an issue of McLuhan's translation of concepts into his own terms in the absence of an adequate table of conversions. Barthes was always much more explicit in his recycling of concepts, even if he often insisted on redefining them in confusing ways. His unfortunate penchant for the constitutive redefinition of linguistic terms produces an awkward vocabulary in which arbitrary means signs formed by the unilateral decision of a deciding group functioning like the superego, one might imagine, behind the parade on the collective catwalk. And motivated refers to the analogical relation between signifier and signified. Thus, a Barthesian semiological system may be both arbitrary and motivated, a contradiction in linguistics terms, many of which he retains and employs in standard ways. But McLuhan, as Michel Verlac observes in his unpublished Thèse de Doctorat, did not provide a code that would help his readers decide about the status and relation of the heterogeneous fragments in which he wrote. McLuhan provided no key to the hierarchy among the fragments and gave little direction about whether a given passage was intentionally insightful, accidental, comic, or purely stylistic. The mosaic method was characterized, according to Verlac, by a generalized differentiation which made McLuhan neo-Baroque and postmodernist before the letter. The absence of this code allowed McLuhan to be many things for many people and, more importantly, also enabled him to appear to be mining a number of intellectual veins. In a letter to anthropologist Edmund Carpenter, McLuhan situated the work of Levi-Strauss in the Cartesian tradition, which he described as working on figure minus ground. Against this tradition, McLuhan approached phenomena through their grounds, which he sought to feel. In spite of this important difference, McLuhan still referred to his approach as structuralist, and in the same breath as existentialist. His explanation, in a letter to Marshall Fiswick, written a year later, was twofold. The reason that I am admired in Paris is that my approach is rightly regarded as structuralist. Moreover, nobody except myself in the media field has ventured to use the structuralist or existentialist approach. McLuhan suggested in this letter that the Mechanical Bride was in some sense existentialist.
That makes me want to read it.
By this term, McLuhan suggests that his first book recorded the perceptions of his experience of objects and tried to avoid what he thought of as a moralizing tone, which was a poor guide in decoding social myths. The problem with so-called phenomenologists, such as Levi-Strauss, McLuhan believed, was the left hemisphere tradition of groundless, pure ideas, in which they worked. Moreover, they ignored the study of effects, environments, or grounds. McLuhan could take the name structuralist, since his focus subsumed this approach without succumbing to its overemphasis on abstract forms. A clarification is in order. It may be, as Curtis suggests, that the medium is the message entails the study of language rather than parole. McLuhan approached figure through ground in order to understand their interplay or gestalt.
So language, or langue, as the French say, versus parole. I think parole is like how the language is actually spoken between speaking subjects, as opposed to the language itself, in and of itself, which includes the written form, includes the part that people have been, subjectivized into language versus speech. That's the difference there. And form versus ground.
Figure versus ground.
Figure versus ground. Yeah. Figure versus ground. Figure is, that's foreground.
Foreground versus background.
Foreground versus background. Yeah.
McLuhan approached the figure through ground in order to understand their interplay or gestalt. The medium may be the figure of the message's ground or vice versa. This makes McLuhan's structuralism Barthesian to the degree that Barthes' particular brand of semiology taught a related lesson with regard to the long parole distinction. Barthes' semiological extension of the linguistic distinction between long and parole led him to reflect upon the reciprocal comprehensiveness of the terms in the dialectic of social object and individual act. Barthes was interested in the semiological prospects of such a distinction, and they were for him brightest in the case of the garment system, as he would show in detail with regard to the written systems of fashion in Système de la Mode. McLuhan's interest in figure-ground interplay allowed him to take many labels, since his work was neither trapped in the study of pure form, nor merely a registry of disconnected effects. His inventories of effects, such as The Medium is the Message and War and Peace in the Global Village, did not appear until the late 1960s and were marked by his interest in environments, that is, total containers which recode sensory life. McLuhan was not well read in structuralism. His reading of Jean-Marie Benoit's The Structural Revolution in the late 1970s, however, conjured for him the image of the X-ray characteristics of the electric age, one of whose effects he believed was the structural method itself, with its abstract, disembodied patterns. McLuhan's terms of translation had by then changed, even though he continued to refer to structuralism as phenomenology, while thinking of phenomenological philosophers such as Sartre in terms of their supposed responses to the violent, discarnate X-ray favored by structuralism. Phenomenology, that is structuralism in McLuhan's words, was, echoing the language he developed in the Gutenberg galaxy, light through, and therefore a televisual pattern through which light travels, a kind of X-ray, as opposed to light on, with which he associated visual intensity, a blinding bias for fixity of point of view, and literal interpretation. McLuhan's approach to the history of French philosophy was novel, indeed, for he read the Cartesian tradition in terms of the effects of electricity. My goal here is not to explain away McLuhan's misuses of terms. His handling of methodological labels was so obviously misleading that merely to repeat this would be uninteresting.
Oh, come on, man. I want to know why you think that. Lay it out for me, but whatever.
I mean, he's highlighting how, and I would be gracious with McLuhan and say, no, you are doing something different. So you are going to take words that already have their meanings and apply them in new ways, because every time a new field is created, it can do not but use or appropriate or misuse already existing language and terminology.
It's like Mikey and myself, like we both say we're structural existentialists, we're existential structuralists, but we're not. We are, but we're not. Like, that doesn't mean anything, but it does. You know, it's should give people a sense, but also it's misleading. It's problematic. I mean, even John McGowan was saying something along those lines. He was saying his is an existentialist.
Yeah. And
it's obviously like Lacan's a structuralist of some sort. It's just, I don't know that these are ever that useful of terms, you know. But they're rough indicators for the fact that we want to not just understand things by looking at them sort of in this nominalistic way. No. And we also don't do things in a Platonic way. No. We are trying to develop or find, we're trying to discover actual structures of existence that carry across different situations and aren't just patterns that are appearing within these different experiences, but are actually there, right? Timenergy is one of those, right? It's an existential structure or category. And existentialism just speaks to the fact that it's relevant to our actual lives. And it's easy for me to see how McLuhan is kind of existential in the sense that he is talking about like information overload, sensory overload, like, you know, these kinds of things, we experience them and they shape our experiential lives. So existential in that sense, in that limited sense, but in this like broader technical sense of dealing with like anxiety and dread and death. And no, he's not doing that.
Yeah.
Like radical freedom and agency, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
The program will resume shortly, right after this DIY commercial that is not for any sponsor other than ourselves. Thank you for watching.
Whether we are already fully in the grip of the techno-capital AI singularity or not, we likely feel as though there's not much we can do.
As allies of future generations, we aren't giving up so easily.
To quote the author of Manifesto, the Mad Farmer Liberation Front, we wake in the night at the least sound in fear of what our life and our children's lives may be.
This fear is not new. The question of technology, media, and institutions became unavoidable in the 20th century. Yet when we think of institutions, the most radical critiques people have encountered came from either Michel Foucault or Jürgen Habermas. These thinkers towered over the theory scene in the 1970s and 80s as radicals took their long march through the institutions.
When it comes to theories of social change, the tendency is to put our hopes in leaving the existing institutions, the current order failing, or some overnight revolution to bring us salvation. Otherwise, we lean in and do the best we can with what's afforded by the existing institutions. Reform or revolution, nothing ever changes, so we keep putting our hopes in education.
So progressives say, if only more people had access to better education, then that would solve the problems. But they have not thought seriously enough about the nature of our institutions, or this thing called education that they offer.
The most radical critiques of schooling that teachers encounter issue from Paulo Freire, Bell Hooks, and Henry Giraud, but none of these ever got to the root of institutions themselves. The theorist who did this was Ivan Illich.
Gaining brief stardom in the 70s, Ivan Illich was the father of the deschooling movement, inspiring hundreds of radical schools and generations of homeschooling parents. But this characterization of his work as the anti-school guy was his ultimate demise, for that only takes account of a surface level of his work. Illich was immediately misunderstood and quickly abandoned.
The issue goes far beyond schools. We spend our entire lives mediated through institutions that totalize, instrumentalize, and reduce humans, all of our possibilities, to something predictable, calculable, and exchangeable, easy to control. The interests of state and capital here overlap entirely. Our desires are thus turned into commodities and our time energy into labor power. Illich doesn't stop here, though, for institutions are not the whole picture.
When people think of schooling today, they think of studying for exams, not learning for the sake of learning. When people think of hospitals, they think of treating illnesses, not human-to-human care and well-being. When people think of transportation, they think of speed and efficiency, not the possibility of sustained, regular, and meaningful connections. When people think of reading, they think of collecting information, not lingering with an idea. The move from schooling to schole requires serious inquiry into the conditions of possibility for this mode.
I'm calling for a sincere and earnest revival of Illich. While most introductions to Illich limit their engagement to his earlier works, a series of polemics against schooling and institutionalized consumer society, I want to go deeper and lead us to a more robust understanding of who and what a human is for Illich. With his help, we will reopen the question of what we are, what we can be, and the types of lives we are willing to give our time and energy to bring into being, if there are to be humans in the future.
This course begins on June 13th and goes through July 4th, 2024. It meets on Thursdays at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. You can enroll at theoryunderground.com/courses/Illich-1, or just click on the link in the description. For those who just want to spend a month really thinking about schooling and institutions, this is a fantastic way to do so. But for those who are looking to go deeper with a community of truth seekers who are going beyond the current theory scene to form an intellectual milieu, this is a fantastic way to do so, because the Theory Underground 2024 conference at the end of October 23rd through 27th is going to have special panels for presentations related to this course. Any student of this course will have opportunities to present, and those presentations can ultimately culminate in submissions that may be accepted into the anthology we are doing on the critique of schooling and education, to be published either at the end of this year or at the beginning of 2025.
Thank you.
We hope to see you there.
There is little point in correcting such glaring misnomers as McLuhan's reference to the practices of Yale Derridians as phenomenology as it is currently in vogue at Yale, and elsewhere. McLuhan's penchant for the translation of concepts into his own loosely defined nomenclature, making available only vague tables of conversion, might be called Barthesian in scope and intensity. While it is well known that Barthes did not honor the concepts he frequently borrowed from several disciplines, he normally provided a table of conversions. St. Louis, Paris, Birmingham. This is the... what river this is?
Missouri State line. We're driving over it right now.
So this is not the Mississippi, but it's the one that feeds into the Mississippi.
There's a little castle tower over there. Oh, this feeds into the Mississippi. Ah, cool.
Maybe this is the Missouri River? I don't know. But yeah, this is a big river.
It's a big boy.
Maybe it is the Mississippi. It's just the
Skinny neck
It's just
of
the
it.
skinny part of the Mississippi.
Wait, I can use a bathroom in the next 15.
Bathroom break.
Okay.
And then we can give Ryan a bathroom break too.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
St. Louis, Paris, Birmingham. In the study of popular culture in the 1950s.
Shit, we should have met up with Mandy.
Oh yeah. Well, didn't she say she was going on the road?
Oh, yeah.
I think
so.
I think she was like, yeah, I don't really stay there. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
In the study of popular culture in the 1950s, Mythologies had an important precursor in McLuhan's The Mechanical Bride. For a while, as Vermilliac puts it, this fiancé recalls to our French ears certain pages of Mythologies. McLuhan's political position in this book was on the face of it distant from that of Barthes. Despite this distance, there were points of contact and numerous devices used to establish it. Vermilliac suggests that McLuhan mentions as one of his fondest memories the fact of having shaken hands with Roland Barthes, a thinker for whom he had great respect. Whatever the origin of this memory, suffice to say that McLuhan's sense of mythology was not explicitly Barthesian, even though it did not completely eschew politics. The meetings of McLuhan and Barthes still endure as myths. Whether they took place on paper or in a cafe seems a moot point, but one worth pursuing nonetheless. In the preface to The Mechanical Bride, McLuhan reveals that he will cooperate with the whirlpool action of the new commercial education of the mass media. He does not use the figure of inversion. Rather, McLuhan reverses the direction of advertising, turning it against itself, forcing it to enlighten as opposed to devouring its prey. McLuhan situates the target audience, at first figured as prey, at the center of the mediatic maelstrom. This vantage point enables one better to witness and analyze the action at hand. And from this critical observation, it is hoped, McLuhan adds, many individual strategies may suggest themselves. The lesson McLuhan learned from Poe is well known. If one struggles against the current of a whirlpool, one will drown. If, on the contrary, one observes and rides the current, waiting for an opportune moment to save oneself by breaking out of it, then one is likely to survive.
Maelstrom strategies.
And also using the master's tools.
Fuck yeah.
To tear down the house. Like, if we keep breaking ourselves against the brick wall, if we keep throwing our bodies into the gears, we're just going to be reduced to paste. But if we harness the energies that are there, if we harness the acceleration that is taking place, that is unstoppable at this point in time, then we can at least hope to be effective. Maybe we won't be effective, but at the very least, we're not all just masturbating.
And we have to know what to harness and what to counteract. And that's why theory matters, is because all praxis should be an experiment of what to harness versus what to counteract.
That's it. That's why I don't give a shit about organizing. Because we haven't theorized how to organize in the first place.
Yeah.
And I wouldn't say I don't give a shit about organizing. It's just, that's been a thread of conversation over the last couple weeks.
He's only recently come out and actually put it in such stark terms, and I think it's because in actual situations where the difference between us and others is being erased,
yes,
I think Nance has had to step forward and be like, no, organizing doesn't matter
as much. It still does matter. I don't want to take the position that it doesn't matter, because it does. However,
yeah, but better to spend 15 years theorizing and then 5 years organizing than the other way around.
Right.
Or you know, go and just organize until you burn out, then do the 15 years of theory while dabbling with maintaining dialogue with people who do the organizing, and you know, maybe dip in and out of it and just try to be more scientific about that. Sure. But yeah, the priority should be way more on the one side, and that's the counteracting.
I mean,
that's a counteracting maneuver. You're counteracting everyone else in the world telling you, don't do that. Yeah. Just organize, just go protest, instead of like, there's not like this pressure to do theory. No one's really putting that pressure on you, except for maybe a couple of weirdos on the internet.
Yeah, and the fact that there are people who think, well, all you got to do is organize, all you got to do is demonstrate, all you got to do. Even last night in the conversation, it came up how mutual aid, I believe, and it turns out some other people believe that mutual aid will be a cornerstone of the human future. But it can't just be discrete, disconnected acts of mutual aid in small organizations, and it can't be atomized. It really does have to be in concert with this theorizing of a broad interconnectedness. A bunch of anarchists having community gardens and feeding each other is awesome, but currently those anarchists view themselves as discrete actors. And so we need to think. So yeah, the people that say just organize, just do some direct action, just, you don't need to read, we read it for you. That, I think, is why I get so invested and why I am so quick to fucking jump off the cliff of it doesn't matter, because there are so many people who do it in the opposite direction.
Yeah, man. And I think I've been watching this evolve on Nance's end, and I think it started with him saying, we're not doing poetry, we're not doing activism, this is its own thing, it's different, even though other people just want to tend to read or use it in those ways. And then this development of like, no, it matters more. It's like, I don't know, even if we're overstating our case, I don't think we are, but I think it even if we were, it has to be asserted. This has to be a position that is advanced, and who better to do it than us? Because obviously when someone like Todd McGowan does it, he has like this guilty conscience of all these people who don't have time energy being like, well, we don't have it and you do, so what do you mean we have to read? And it's like, yeah, anybody in his position is hard pressed to make this argument. No, it takes us being like, we know, but nevertheless, we have to do this.
I won't accept anything. I won't accept anything less. And yeah, if this is the hill that we die on, then we set that limit for ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. 100%. That needs to be clipped on its own. But anyway, let's keep going.
The lesson McLuhan learned from Poole breaking out. Okay, cooperation is a key, but not the only important factor. Since hope hangs between capitulation and the formation of a personal strategy that is not necessarily oppositional. Between a paralyzed and an energized mind, there is for McLuhan the privileged attitude of amused and rational detachment, of watching oneself sink in order to swim. This attitude was McLuhan's remedy for the ills of passivity produced by mechanization and homogenization. The reader has to be a second Ulysses in order to stand the siren onslaught, as he put it, shifting from Poe to Homeric myth in the process, but without abandoning the nautical metaphors he favored. McLuhan was not prevented from identifying an attitude at work in advertising which did not want to be named, just as Barthes argued that the bourgeois exnominates itself, obliterating its name so as to become the unnamed source of meaning. McLuhan explained in similar terms in the Ballet Loose, in The Bride, that the style and technique of Time magazine constitute a most influential set of attitudes which are effective precisely because they are not obviously attached to any explicit doctrines or opinions. McLuhan sensed the process of exnomination in the way a magazine provides its readership with certain attitudes, emotions, and signs of their difference from other audiences, building coherence through, in the case of Time, a kind of formulaic diary writing. Depoliticized speech has political effects, McLuhan observed, even though he did not investigate them beyond noting the mindlessness and infantilism of Time's readers and expressing the fear that one day a goose-stepping reader might make a grab for power. Dude, I fucking love it.
I didn't know that Times readers were so bad back then as well.
Yeah, exactly. In spite of his efforts to avoid moralizing, McLuhan could not help but condemn irresponsible uses of communication techniques in the name of an explicitly fascist power grab. McLuhan certainly recognized numerous symbolic reinforcements of the unequal relations of power in the everyday lives of Americans. For instance, his essay on Charlie McCarthy identifies the voice used by the ventriloquist Edgar Bergen in relation to his dummy, Charlie McCarthy as a parrot-like version of corporate and state paternalism riddled with bureaucrat ease. The distinctive feature of Bergen's voice is a neutral patience, which for McLuhan embodies the relationship between the average man and the impersonal agencies of social control in a technological world. Unfortunately, these agencies remained uninvestigated in McLuhan's work. But at his best, he could hear them in the cultural ephemera of the 1950s. It is in this specific sense that there are echoes worth listening to between The Bride and Mythologies. Still, there always seemed to be something holding McLuhan back. Even his insightful studies of the mechanization and fragmentation of women's bodies in advertising discourses were mired in his distaste for powerful expressions of female sexuality and treatment of homosexuality and the division between pleasure and procreation as the deleterious effects of the commodification of sex. It is useful to recall in this context that Jonathan Miller's remarks on McLuhan's abdication of political intelligence, entailed by his focus on abstract form over content and his celebration of mediatic techniques as examples of avant-gardist practices akin to those used by poets and painters. Miller's reading is astute on the matter of McLuhan's general ignorance of social reality. Conversely, McLuhan's response to Miller is a masterpiece of professorial paternalism. While the sheer number and variety of political gaffes McLuhan made is in itself astonishing, not to mention the negligible effects the recognition of these have made on contemporary McLuhanites, Miller acknowledges the important place the Mechanical Bride has in cultural criticism. In Technology and the Canadian Mind, Croker identifies what he calls the first of two blind spots in McLuhan's communication theory. First, McLuhan had no systematic or even eclectic theory of the relationship between economy and technology. And
he didn't.
Yeah, and certainly no critical appreciation of the appropriation and thus privatization of technology by the lead institutions, multinational corporations, and the state in advanced industrial societies.
He touches on it very lightly, but he does make a pass, wherein he says that it's like we are all renting our organs from giant corporations now, because that's what satellites basically is like those are extensions of our actual sensory apparatuses, but they are being privately owned. He touches, but he really is in pass. And I think that this guy, he's touching on like how McLuhan is, I'm not political, I'm not smart political, whatever, but at the same time he's maybe not doing himself credit. I have to say, not only that, he is anti-Marxist, and he sets that up in Understanding Media. He's not saying Heideggerians are wrong. He's not saying Derrida is wrong. He's saying Marxists are wrong. And it's very important to always keep that in mind with McLuhan.
Right. McLuhan is... Someone built a new hammer. And there are people who are concerned with who is using the hammer. But McLuhan himself is mostly concerned with understanding the hammer, what it can do, what it does do,
what it does to us,
how it's used, and all that. So, like, McLuhan really is bracketing out a lot of the, and he's also very aware of it. Where he's talking about you can't be depoliticized. Like it's always going to be political, but he also maintains this apolitical position. But he really is like the first to really do an exhaustive study of the tool,
right?
Which I think is just as essential as asking who's using it. You have to understand what it even does in the first place to really even have a reason to care about who's using it.
Right.
Which is why we must have a critical media theory.
Right. Which is, I believe, Baudrillard is probably like the first most explicit like critical media theorist in terms of really being the bridge between Marx and McLuhan.
Yeah.
It's just that he's also like impossible to understand, and so thank God we have the person who can teach him at Theory Underground
Everybody just has to get their own Mikey, which of course you can't. You have to have the one and only Mikey.
Yeah, sort of have monopolized him, but you can get him in Theory Underground.
Yeah.
By the time you're watching this, the course is already in the works, so stay tuned on that.
You could rent some Mikey.
Yeah. For sure. If you help me free him, then we'll share. You get I'll share. Yeah, I'll share.
It was not, of course, that McLuhan was unaware of the relationship of corporate power and technology. One searing subtext of understanding media and the Mechanical Bride had to do with the almost malignant significance of the corporate control of electronic technologies. But if McLuhan understood the full dangers of corporate control of technological media, nowhere did he extend this insight into a reflection on the relationship of capitalism and technology. That was Croker. In short, McLuhan had no political economy of technology, and his Catholic humanism did not contradict the will to empire. But the blind spot of economy was not exactly a dead spot of political mythology. Croker rarely mentions the bride, and when he does, it is in virtue of its subtext, albeit a searing one, a textual maneuver designed to play down the outbursts that run through McLuhan's texts. These very moments of excess are signs of the text working against itself. Despite Croker's sympathetic reading of McLuhan, a rarity, after all, on the left, given the torrents unleashed against him, I want to draw a different conclusion. Every eruption of political mythology in The Bride was for McLuhan a step backward into moralizing. Yet, in spite of himself, there are untheorized perceptions of a ubiquitous mythic consciousness whose influence derives precisely from the ideological fact that it is represented as the common values of the people. In Freedom to Listen and Freedom American Style, McLuhan made an issue of corporate ownership in America because he witnessed through his study of the mass media the simulated freedoms permitted to individuals by means of the practices of consumption. Here we go. I'm not suggesting that McLuhan had a political mythology of technological consciousness and an insight into the consequences of the ownership of the means of production. McLuhan's political remarks became reflective only to the degree that he struggled to achieve the status of a detached and rational observer who did not attack his subject matter. His attempt to avoid moralizing and erase his point of view did not reveal its own mythic dimensions through a reflection on his identification with a rational, detached, paternal, and neutral voice, supported by literary allusions. Picking up on his nautical metaphors, McLuhan taught that students of the mass media must swim in their waters, practicing so often as to feel at home in them, if you will. The swimmer who does not experience rough water, however, has not experienced the power of the medium through which he moves. The swimmer must be in a position to experience the process by means of which the medium makes itself strange to him. In this process, the medium reveals its dangers. Applied to the mass media, the image of the whirlpool implies that there is simply more water around it. This water may be less turbulent, of course, but it is still water, which is only to say that there was not for McLuhan, circa 1951, a shoreline in view marking the extent of mass-mediated life. If one cannot simply get out of the water, then one must adapt in order to endure. Despite the dissimulations and vagaries of the demonstrations of the relationship between McLuhan and Barthes, there remains the matter of the unfulfilled promise of their collaborative effort. There is no rewind button on the Betamax of life, wrote the video artist Nam June Paik, in the course of lamenting that no one had videotaped the periodic meetings of earthly stars such as Cage and McLuhan, or even, to add insult to injury for my purposes only, McLuhan and Barthes. The meetings of McLuhan and Barthes in Paris in 1973 belong to a universe of untapped, untaped, but not unrealized points of personal contact. These are the stuff of myth, or rather, they are the mythologies of sociologists concerned with sociologists of mythologies, to borrow a reversal used by Pierre Bourdieu and Jean-Claude Passeron, whose phrases reveal the circular and phantasmagoric logic of French mass mediologues, for whom the masses are masses only as the massified receivers of a massively diffused mass culture. I shall be careful not to confound the meetings of figures of mythic proportions with myths of their meetings.
We got 4 minutes till we're at a gas station, by the way.
Sick. Barthes could not be counted among McLuhan's young French readers whose excitement about his ideas seemed to unsettle an older generation of established intellectuals. Moreover, Barthes did not mention McLuhan in his published writings. Conversely, McLuhan mentioned Barthes only in his letters. He appears to have known of Mythologies from secondary sources, but he had been made aware by his correspondence of the parallels various critics had found between his and Barthes' early writings on pop culture. Notwithstanding what may be called the detergent factor which bound them together, both McLuhan and Barthes recognized the mystical properties afforded to this product, a fact commented upon by both French and English readers alike. Their meetings could not generate as much interest in a collaborative project as soap powder advertisements held for them. McLuhan and Barthes met at a cocktail party at the apartment of Claude Cartier-Bresson, the former's publisher at Maison Mame, in Paris in the early summer of 1973. Cartier-Bresson was a famous photographer. McLuhan had flown to Paris on his way to read a paper at the Biennale Internationale de l'Information in Le Touquet, France. McLuhan, from reporting to programming, the next 100 years, translated into French. Oh, that's all. Okay. Among those present were Cartier-Bresson's well-known brother, the photographer. Oh, Henri Cartier-Bresson. That's right. Henri Cartier-Bresson was the photographer. The sociologist of art, Jean Duvigneau, the playwright Eugene Ionesco, the journalist Guy Demure, the media artist Fred Forrest, and McLuhan's friend and colleague in Toronto, Derek de Kerkhove, as well as an entourage from Maine. As the conversation drifted onto the topic of myth, de Kerkhove, who was acting as a go-between and translator for McLuhan, suggested that the micro-myths of Mythologies might give a specific shape to McLuhan's recent thoughts about reworking and updating The Mechanical Bride, a book about which he had reservations because he believed it to have been too jejune, too literary, too moralistic, etc. It was McLuhan's enthusiastic French publisher, Cartier-Bresson, who proffered the idea that McLuhan and Barthes could work at this project together. It is hardly surprising that McLuhan's publisher would suggest such a collaborative effort, given the enormous interest it would have generated.
For real, for real.
A few months after his visit to Paris, Cartier-Bresson wrote to McLuhan inquiring about and expressing his great interest in any projects he may have been working on with Barthes. While McLuhan had initially received the proposal of a collaboration as an amusing idea, which might be looked at in more detail, Barthes was willing to entertain it, but with only mild interest. Indeed, the collaborative project was not raised to the following day at a meeting over lunch with McLuhan, Cartier-Bresson, Barthes, and de Kerkhove. Sensing that the project was doomed, de Kerkhove did not pursue the matter further with McLuhan. Break time.
Cool. All right, so now we are back from our gas station break. Our son, Ryan, the mascot of this whole tour, got to have himself a potty break. He got some water and just fed him. So now he is happy and cuddling down on the floor. And now we're gonna keep reading this essay that is about Barthes and McLuhan. I feel shortchanged. I wanted some Baudrillard and McLuhan, but I guess it's all important build up. So it's just, we're all gonna get seduced, I suppose. Yeah. Here's my one gripe, and I just wish that he would make Barthes relevant, because everything he said about Barthes so far is all the things that people say about Barthes, but none of it ever clicks for me because I haven't done the Barthes readings, so no one's ever just made Barthes relevant to an outsider, from what I can tell. And yeah, I'm like, did you get anything from all their stuff about Barthes so far?
Yeah, I mean, the mythology stuff, I mean, maybe I didn't get anything, but at least it like registered, like, yeah, okay,
yeah.
And putting McLuhan with Barthes, yeah, it does a little something for me, probably.
It does make sense.
Yeah.
And
yeah,
okay.
The details of McLuhan's meetings with Barthes neither reinforce the notion that Barthes was the French McLuhan, nor do McLuhan's remarks on structuralism support the claim that he was a structuralist. It is surely ridiculous to suggest that McLuhan was the Canadian Barthes. The seductive power of a suggestion at a cocktail party was also at work in the literature of the period. animating the discussion of all those concerned and driving them to the unstable arrangement of McLuhan and Barthes as potential co-authors. I have been a kind of party pooper in all of this, I admit, having risen to the occasion to isolate an unnoticed correspondence between the two earthly stars on the grounds of their mutual recognition of bourgeois consciousness in their respective countries as the common sense of the period. McLuhan's Bride and Barthes' Mythologies belong to a period rich in cultural criticism. In addition to these two groundbreaking books, one may add Richard Hogarth's The Uses of Literacy, 1957. Together, these constitute a strong international trio of cultural studies in the 1950s. This does not mean that cultural studies has its origins in these books of the 1950s. Nonetheless, much can be learned from the evocative literary flavor of their analyses. Anyway, it would be hard to convince those wedded to the Gramscian tradition that cultural studies began with this trio. Stuart Hall was perhaps correct when he wrote of Birmingham School Cultural Studies that the search for its origins is tempting but illusory. What is striking about these books of McLuhan, Barthes, and Hogarth is the sense of regret each had about the emergence of a mythic consciousness whose distinguishing feature was that it did not want to be identified, and that it erased itself in order to more fully and powerfully perfuse and influence social and cultural life. French bourgeois ideology ex-nominates itself. American magazines offer satisfyingly comprehensive attitudes and opinions to their readers, and the emerging mass form is a faceless, classless, and characterless culture.
Quick note, he's using the word bourgeois here to mean middle class. He's not using it to mean bootstraps and sweat of your brow and Protestant work ethic and liberalism, labor exchange, whatever, markets, everything. No, this is just standard middle class. And this is a big thing in the world of literary criticism, because they're not really based out of theory and they don't really have to figure out what distinctions are when they use these terms that get so flattened between users. It's very common to do this. I have like a whole book about Foucault. The whole thing is arguing that Foucault's entire project is just trying to understand what it means to have a society that is run by the middle class instead of the ruling class. And it's absurd. That has nothing to do with Foucault's project. But the reason that the author makes that mistake is because Foucault uses the word bourgeois. And this guy doesn't have, the guy who's trying to interpret Foucault doesn't have a basis in Marx. So anyway, yeah.
Each of these thinkers isolates, with varying degrees of acuity, how the emergence of a self-effacing consciousness steals away the means of self-differentiation and self-definition by making itself the general measure of social being. To be sure, since the writings of McLuhan, Barthes, and Hogarth span an impressive political spectrum, Hogarth's center socialism and Barthes' Marxian-flavored semiology stand apart from McLuhan's struggle for an apolitical objectivity. Despite his occasional lapses into cultural critique and his regrets about the sense of regret that slipped through the analyses of The Bride, the feeling for what is lost and the consequences of loss differ with each thinker. Hogarth is strongest on this point. For him, what is lost in the bargain is the cultural character of a class that defined itself in terms of tradition, ritual, myth, community, speech, and economic status. Although Hogarth believes that working class people are remarkably resilient, he places resistance to massification in between passivity and positive response. The British working class endures, Hogarth thinks, because working class people are not so badly affected by massification as is often thought. This is so because with a large part of themselves, they are just not there. They are living elsewhere. But as the faceless culture expands...
That's interesting.
Yeah.
In the age of Netflix.
Yeah.
And video gaming.
Yeah. But as the faceless culture expands and becomes more invasive, such other physical sites become fewer and fewer. This was, despite himself, one of the implicit lessons of McLuhan's nautical metaphors. A safe harbor simply couldn't be found. If McLuhan hoped that the study of the mediatic maelstrom would suggest personal strategies for enduring the storm, the more such strategies followed from one's initial capitulation to the very thing with which they sought to deal. The closer endurance moved to the side of passivity born by identification and dependency. Barthes' lessons were even more abstract. The depoliticized speech of myth enables the social class that does not want to be named to naturalize and eternalize itself. Barthes warned that this was an active political process. He further stipulated, however, that the writing of mythologies, understood as ideological criticism, is not revolutionary, since the mythologist is condemned to meta-language, the 7 principal rhetorical forms of myth, while revolution must, in the end, abolish myth. Although the work of Barthes is undeniably central to the way we think of cultural studies in the 1950s, this is especially the case with regard to the issue of finding McLuhan's fellow travelers. Barthes was often the odd man out of the trio I have constituted. In other words, French readers of McLuhan, such as Pierre-Yves Pétalon, thought of Hogarth rather than of Barthes in the context of assessing McLuhan's contributions to, and place in, the field of analyses concerning the impact of the mass media on contemporary consciousness. As surprising as this may now seem, it was no more so than what Hogarth himself experienced upon discovering how he was introduced to a French readership. The following passage from the 3rd volume of Hogarth's memoir, An Imagined Life, Life and Times, is worth quoting at length as a point of entry to the French constitution of the Hogarth-McLuhan relationship. One English critic, friendly but slightly regretful, described my way of going on as deceptively descriptive to the point of casualness. I expect he wished to find an explicit pattern of hypotheses, a set of linked generalizations which the individual descriptions supported, as one commonly finds in French writings. But it was a French sociologist, J.C. Passeron, who in the introduction to the French edition of the Uses of Literacy suggested, to my surprise, that his countrymen look again at their predilection for theoretical structures and learn something from this English commitment to phenomenological detail. He did not think my procedure casual, but rather extraordinarily precise. He even found an underlying organization that amounts to an ethnographic inventory. Hogarth's The Uses of Literacy appeared in French in 1970 under the title of La culture du pauvre, études sur le style de vie des classes populaires en Angleterre. The title evokes Passeron's impression of detail, precision, and ethnographic inventory. The culture of the poor was for Hogarth, one may recall, richer than the emerging classless culture that was transforming English working class life. Comparatively, this new culture was emotionally impoverished. As the economic pressures faced by working class people were lightened by diverse achievements such as hard work.
Michael Downs. Do you want to answer?
Yes. That's how it happened. She thought I said yes before.
Oh.
Yo, what's up?
Okay, so here's the situation. I just finished it, but here's...
You're on recording. Hold on. I'm gonna... We back.
Okay. As the economic pressures faced by working class people were lightened by diverse achievements such as hard-won battles over wages, working conditions, and benefits across the bargaining table by the unions for their members, workers faced a new kind of cultural and community impoverishment of meaning against which Hogarth hoped they would endure. What doubly surprised Hogarth was that the English critic was looking for French-style theorizing, while the French critic found even less casualness and more inherent structure than Hogarth was prepared to admit, precisely against English cultural expectations. In his study of the translation, reception, and effects of Hogarth's book in France, Rigby notes an extraordinary irony about the tides of theory. It is a rather striking paradox that at the very moment when English academics were turning to French theorists and delivering unsympathetic judgments on Hogarth's work, a group of French intellectuals, who were themselves destined to become highly regarded, were beginning to hold up Richard Hogarth as an admirable model to follow. What did McLuhan think of Hogarth? While this question is difficult to answer in detail, a single comment in a letter suffices to sum up McLuhan's attitude. Hogarth is an utter sap. Hogarth was not the sort of fool McLuhan preferred. This rather dismissive remark was provoked by McLuhan's reading of an unsigned TLS review, which happened to have been written by a colleague at the Pontifical Institute at the University of Toronto, Brian Stock, of Hogarth speaking to each other. McLuhan was reacting to the idea that television was a vehicle of a faceless and classless culture. As I have argued, McLuhan had long since turned his back on his own version of this critical insight. Such insights were for McLuhan outdated and static, for his exalted position went beyond endorsement and condemnation, or so he believed. McLuhan's only advance on the Levisite strategy of the critique of everyday life through the critical analysis of the literature of the canon was parody. It was a risk that McLuhan took. Pétion thinks, but lost, since as he descended into the maelstrom, he suffered from an attack of vertigo that disabled his critical faculties. According to Pétion, in England during the 1950s, the study of popular culture displayed a relevance and vibrancy beyond McLuhan's reach in the work of Raymond Williams and others. But for Pétion, the grand nom in this field was Hogarth. The research results of the Birmingham Center for Contemporary Cultural Studies are just as important, but in quite different ways, as those produced at John Culkin's Center for Communications at Fordham, where McLuhan had accepted the Albert Schweitzer Chair in 1967-68, bringing along his entourage of Harley Parker and Edmund Carpenter. In a moment of rhetorical excess, Pétion states that as far as analyses of the impact of the mass media on contemporary consciousness are concerned, we would give all of McLuhan, except The Mechanical Bride, for one chapter of a book by Hogarth. McLuhan's intuitions, flashes, and fusions are, on this view, only marginal notes to British cultural studies, in that it remains to hope that when the dust has settled after its passage, the McLuhan cyclone will have at least been the occasion in France to better discover what there was before and what probably will be after McLuhan. Pétion's approach enables him to place McLuhan in the context of critical moments in the development of cultural studies, but only in order to marginalize his accomplishments by a strategy of exclusion and the rhetorical diminishment of everything he wrote, except
For real. For real, though. What a thing to say.
That is not connected to the Birmingham School.
I like how he says British cultural blah blah studies. It's like, okay, give us one thinker.
Yeah.
One in the whole scene. Instead, they're just invoking like me and my friends at the conference, right?
Yeah.
Like they don't have like a thinker.
Right.
Yeah, who's your thinker? Oh, we just have a bunch of people writing journal articles and fucking books that no one cares about. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, like an audience of bored college students that are in a room on their phones.
Uncle fucking Moneybags.
Yeah. Hold on. Where the fuck?
I was the only one who laughed at that when you read. Maybe Ann did too, but like you're like, and everyone else last night was like,
Well, pretentious liberals,
Opposites 'cause they
edgy
have
Orthodox bros,
sticks up
and Uncle fucking Moneybags. Like, yeah, dude. Like,
some of them were Uncle fucking Moneybags. You
Yeah.
know it.
yeah. But only in order to Pétion's approach critical moments, development of cultural studies, but only in order to marginalize his accomplishments by strategy of exclusion, diminishment that is not connected. As we have seen, McLuhan's readers knocked on the door of structuralism and sought entry for him on the basis of, I tried to show, the vaguest of reasons. McLuhan was shut out in both instances. Still, it is McLuhan's bride that serves as a two-sided signpost pointing toward both Paris and Birmingham from, of all places, St. Louis, which we just drove through. No, yes. Yeah.
Is he saying that McLuhan was like based out of St. Louis for a while? I didn't know that.
Yeah, I didn't know that either.
Maybe he's just going off of like where one of the books was published or something.
Yeah.
He's like, he's the St. Louis thinker.
Oh, the St. Louis. Oh, shit. Who the fuck was talking about that? Somebody was talking about that. It was Žižek. Žižek brought up St. Louis.
Talk to some Hegelians in
Yeah.
St. Louis.
Yeah. But I wonder if there's like an institution that is here that might have published McLuhan from that.
Yeah.
Chapter 2, the end of the book and the beginning of television. Alongside prophecy and charlatanry, meteorological phenomena were often used to describe both McLuhan and the effects of his ideas. The cyclone, to use Pierre-Yves Perion's term, that hit Paris in the mid-1960s was not referred to on a familiar first-name basis, like most North American storms. This wind tore through the capital, rustling the pages of academic and popular publications and ruffling the feathers of Parisian intellectuals and cultural animateurs alike. McLuhanism, as the cyclone came to be known, blew hot and cold, or rather cool, to borrow McLuhan's concept, depending on how much information one thought it transmitted and, consequently, the degree of participation required to complete its message. But as a lot of hot wind requiring minimal involvement, McLuhanism was deflected by those for whom it was fundamentally a loud, albeit beautifully formed, blast. For those who luxuriated in its coolness and the intensive participation it elicited, its dazzle was all the more fascinating and full for the openings it left by flitting from insight to insight. McLuhanism could be unfortunately full but empty, yet gloriously empty but full. Foul wind or invigorating blast, revolutionary or impostor, genial grok or sinister exaggerator. McLuhanism was all of these and more. The cyclone collapsed these disjunctions into a bundle of paradoxes. The study of McLuhanism concerns the effects of this phenomenon, its initial explosive impact in the 1960s, and its later lines of influence across French cultural production, particularly in sociology theory broadly conceived. McLuhan himself would not have been entirely pleased with my study of effects, despite the fact that he occasionally claimed to study nothing else. For McLuhan, effects were just as likely to precede causes as vice versa, or occur simultaneously. One first looks for effects and then finds the causes that will produce them. One starts with solutions and creates the problems that they solve. There is some truth in this so-called artistic strategy, as most marketers know when faced with the situation of having to create needs for a product that satisfies them before they exist. But it should be taken cum grano salis, with a grain of salt. The effects of McLuhanism are just as paradoxical as its view of effects. What interests me in this chapter are the places McLuhan's ideas were thought to occupy in French intellectual life. To take a pinch of salt from McLuhan would be to acknowledge that as French thinkers found their bearings in the wake of this cyclone, the effects of McLuhanism provided for the invention of a neologism that signified the phenomenon that had hit and continued to batter them. In addition, the places already occupied by this phenomenon had to be found, as it were, in order to explain its sudden and widespread impact on French culture in the first place. These were cleanup operations and justifications rather than examples of nonlinear and non-sequential causality. The time was, however, ripe for the arrival of McLuhan's ideas in France for two reasons. The question of écriture had already been poised in French philosophical circles, and McLuhan came to be placed in relation to this concept. His emphasis on medium or form over content gave direction to research in the sociology of the media and policy formation in the area of broadcasting. The intellectual and administrative ambitions of French sociologist Jean Cazeneuve were carried forward on the prevailing winds of McLuhanism. Writing beyond the book. Not everyone appreciates a cyclone, to say the least. Elaborate defenses against it were mounted as it blew through the human sciences at the Centre d'études des communications de masse of the École pratique des hautes études en Paris. For one of its members, Olivier Bergelin, not even the abundance of humor found in McLuhan's work could dispel the tiresome impression of tawdry showiness produced by the incessant handling of overpolished paradoxes. Disrespect for the principle of non-contradiction goes hand in hand with the delight in bad puns in McLuhan's imagination. McLuhan's way of being bad troubled Bergelin, because his prodigious taste for the new was really a greedy acceptance of it, having nothing to do with intellectual progressivism. This frantic modernist seemed unaware that the most contemporary culture of the period was already out of date, full of the past, of resistance to change, and all sorts of conservatisms, not to mention alienations and anguish. McLuhan's celebration of modern life rested on a shaky foundation. he jovially tramples over ethnography, sociology, linguistics, and psychoanalysis, evoking these disciplines only through the names of thinkers from whom he quotes out of context. Bergelin charges that McLuhan doesn't enter into current debates and recent developments in the disciplines from which he borrows. Despite McLuhan's taste for the new, he is out of date and place in every discipline save one, the history of Anglo-Saxon literature in which he was trained. The absence of a semiological reflection on media in McLuhan's work is a case in point for Bergelin. Instead of turning toward the sign, McLuhan interests himself in the environments that media constitute, thus weakening, in Bergelin's estimation, the analysis of communication by operating with only two categories of medium, message, and content. Even here, the latter is understood as another, previously dominant technological environment. The content of writing is speech. The content of the telephone is the telegraph. Read today, Bergelin's objections to McLuhan are strikingly anti-postmodern in the sense that they associate him with stable postmodern phenomena such as the confusion of genres and disciplines, the depthlessness of his writing, the poverty of his categories, and impoverishment of his thematics by his own incessant punning. Bergelin advises that McLuhan cannot be read to the letter. For example, while causality is the single explanatory principle expressing the relationship between media and galactic shifts in history, the use of this concept is largely metaphorical and signifies congruence, significantly reducing the power of the analysis. McLuhan's system has no scientific value, Bergelin states, and for this reason, the empirical validity of research in the sociology of mass media makes as little sense to McLuhan as McLuhan's results make for such a breed of sociologists. Indeed, Bergelin makes the important passing observation that McLuhan's response to the necessity of empirical validation is that this requirement dissimulates the true problems, a little like rationalization in the Freudian sense. This places McLuhan in the position of the analyst, for whom the figurative analysand, an empirically minded sociologist of media, subjects the media to an explanatory principle, including a strong appeal to reality, which conceals the unconscious motives and defenses of the analysand's methodological claim. Rationalization, in this context, is a form of resistance to McLuhan's efforts to understand the true structure of the medium as message. This is the first intimation of the psychological profile of the paradoxes into which one was plunged by voicing criticisms of McLuhan. I take up this issue in more detail in Chapter 3. The idea that communication does not exhaust itself in the manifest content of the message is for Bergelin McLuhan's most general and enduring insight. This did not, however, align McLuhan with the depth hermeneutics. If, for many French thinkers, McLuhan's focus on the medium put him into contact with structuralism, a matter I considered in some depth in the previous chapter, it also enabled him to be placed in relation to the sorts of post-structuralism practiced by Barthes, Derrida, and the group around the journal Tel Quel. This placement is from the outset extraordinarily awkward since, as Bergelin himself admits, McLuhan ignores and apparently contradicts them. Jean Texier had, in a similar spirit, suggested that McLuhan's annihilation of écriture should be the occasion to turn our attention to the real research of Barthes and Derrida. This placement, which resists the very gesture, thereby working against itself, is made to work on the basis of the shared problematization of the oppositional and metaphysical concepts of speech and writing. Bergelin's readers are left to recall that the double gesture of Derridian deconstruction overturns and displaces the hierarchical arrangement of such metaphysical oppositions in order to analyze hitherto subordinated aspects of the inferior concept of writing, releasing in order to graft them onto a new, general concept of writing. The speech-writing opposition is central to McLuhan's understanding of the transition from the scribal galaxy to the new oral society. But this transition or passage from one concept to the other is not, Derrida specifies, the way of deconstruction. Still, Bergelin insists. However, it is the same value that is sought, despite the contradiction of the formulations, here under the denomination of écriture, there under that of medium, and more clearly, it is a similar conception of signification that is rejected here as speech, and there as content. In both cases, What is foregrounded is that communication cannot be reduced to the single signified of the message. The rhetorical promise by default of a rapprochement between Derrida and McLuhan in terms of the speech-writing opposition wanes as we read Derrida's first concluding remark in Signature Event Context from Margins of Philosophy. We are not witnessing an end of writing which, to follow McLuhan's ideological representation, would restore a transparency or immediacy of social relations. Instead, Derrida continues, emphasizing his own accomplishment, but indeed a more and more powerful historical unfolding of a general writing, of which the system of speech, consciousness, meaning, presence, truth, etc., would only be in effect, to be analyzed as such. Derrida rejects McLuhan's vision of the psychological and social wholeness of pre- and post-literate cultures. His rejection is less interesting than the avenue it opens, the liberation and generalization of the hitherto subordinated predicates of writing. The movement toward the general is parallel to McLuhan's abandonment of specialism, separation, continuity, uniformity, homogeneity, all of the effects of the phonetic alphabet, toward the web of orality. What fact? In his discussion of the passage from Derrida cited above, called A General Oral Form, Fecht leaves the task of working out the relationship between these two generalities, writing and orality, to future scholars. However, he does so ahistorically, that is, without recognizing the history of the relationship between McLuhan and Derrida already worked through during McLuhan's French reception. This does not lessen the significance of the question Fecht posed, nor lessen the degree of difficulty of the task he bequeathed us. The question I wish to pose concerns the general oral form. Is there anything that prevents it from being one of those effects of which Derrida wrote above? To put it in slightly different terms, is there anything that prevents the general oral form from being logocentric? My answer is no. In France, during the late 1960s, Derrida's name was regularly invoked in discussions of McLuhan's concept of writing for the sake of diminishing the seriousness of the latter's work. This is evident in Francois Chatelet's 1967 book, claim that despite the absurdity and deliberately fraudulent nature of McLuhan's theories, they are not without relation to the true questions. In this backhanded way, then Chatelet continues, for it is correct that culture and its diffusion are currently undergoing a radical mutation and that the primacy of the book is being contested. This new situation requires a deep reflection on the fact of writing, reading, and the precarious imperialism of discourse. And for Chatelet, it is Derrida who has reflected most deeply and seriously on these matters. McLuhan is a faiseur, a word meaning both a shark and a show-off, among other things. And the pretentious foolishness of McLuhanism threatens France. Chatelet does not specify the precise nature of the threat, but it is surely a question of resisting the schemes of a concept shark. Perhaps Chatelet believed that he was protecting the youth of France against the seductions of a pseudo-theory. This move, incidentally, is precisely the one that convinced Socrates, and it is also the one used most commonly by conservative American critics with reference to Baudrillard.
This is just proof that they don't like Americans or anything close to Americans, and that's what it comes down to. They're just upset that there's a thinker from this continent that they have to take seriously. And I say that because Nietzsche's not systematic. He's all over the fucking place. They all eat his shit up. Nietzsche didn't predict the internet.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, they're like, oh, we got to protect people from this guy. We got to... This shit that they're saying about him, it's like, I would like to see some rigorous engagement with his ideas. Not just this, like... These are like drive-bys, you know? These are like drive-by fucking jabs.
Drive-by body piercings.
Really quick, I need some information from Dave that is definitely confidential that you don't.
BRB. Okay, we're gonna go to a page break. 5 pages. Let's go.
Hold on. I forgot where it was. Okay, I know where I am. This move, incidentally, is precisely the one that convinced Socrates, fuck you, and commonly American. Okay. Sullen American conservatives and reactionary French philosophers alike would have both McLuhan and Baudrillard drink their respective cups of hemlock. Jean-Marie Benoit pointed out that McLuhan thought the electronic media restore a space of plenitude and presence. That is, in McLuhan's writing, the transition from writing to speech is logocentric and entails transparency, immediacy, nowness, and presence on a global scale. This is precisely what Derrida objects to as ideological. McLuhan's oral society is, however, marked by an acoustic orientation that is also tactile or auditive tactile. Auditive tactile. What this means is that orality is irreducible to speech. As such, because tactility is for McLuhan a sign of the interplay of the senses, itself irreducible to haptic sensation. This does not make McLuhan's oral culture any less metaphysical. It is just that care must be taken in the application of its predicates. My negative answer has, then, one qualification. McLuhan's knowledge of the writings of Derrida was extremely limited. His reading of Derrida was mediated by the writings of Roger Poole, professor of English at the University of Nottingham. In the late 1970s, Poole was a visiting Commonwealth Fellow at York University in Toronto, and during his stay, sent McLuhan several manuscripts, including his review of Derrida's Of Grammatology. From these articles, McLuhan familiarized himself with the term deconstruction, the activities of the Yale Derridians, and could not resist a pun on Derrida's name, deride, which he scribbled in the margins of Poole's review. Poole left McLuhan with the incorrect impression that deconstruction was only a negative project, a single, derisive gesture, as it were. Although the passage into a generalized orality is part of a euphoric ideology, in Edgar Morin's words, that holds little interest for deconstruction. This aspect is precisely what interests others. Morin had many regrets about McLuhanism, including the reduction of a gigantic historical period to a single and monotone factor, a technological medium. Morin writes, if the paradigm of McLuhan is poor, his syntam is rich, not only in terms of the flux of the proposed contiguities, but as much by a dialectical sense, sometimes light, sometimes subtle. McLuhan's galactic thought can be subtle and supple despite its schematic dogmatism, since it alerts us to the interpenetration of galaxies and the neo-tribal or neo-archaic elements of neo-modernity. While Morin valued the flexibility of McLuhan's galactic way of thinking, i.e. one which strives to establish large configurations where unexpected associations reveal a flexible search after complex structuration, the conceptual sin-surround of McLuhanism just as easily produced a galactic giddiness. Suffice to say that the place of McLuhanism was generally recognized as the philosophical milieu in which the deconstruction of the speech-writing opposition took place. It is the work of the grammatologist Derrida, however, that is said to be both real and true. To this depth, McLuhan could only pretend and display the surface effects of serious thinking. The end of the book is not, for McLuhan, the beginning of writing, of Derridian écriture. The end of the book is the beginning of television. McLuhan thought that writing was a supplement to speech. In fact, it was sandwiched between two oralities, the first originary and the second neo-originary, whose unity it interrupted. For writing separates and specializes and undoes the tribal web by granting the individual emotional freedom. It is also civilizing, intensifying, visual, and uniform. In short, writing is exterior to the speech whose place it takes and keeps, and this belief placed McLuhan firmly in the Western metaphysical tradition as Derrida represents it. Derrida takes the risk, then, in Of Grammatology, of thinking of writing as an originary supplement that takes place before and within speech. What makes this thought risky is that it seems absurd and totally unacceptable within the tradition that separates the source from the supplement. A separation McLuhan does nothing to challenge.
I feel nothing.
I'm looking forward to getting on to the Baudrillard.
Exactly.
Like, that was good, and I did appreciate the Barthes stuff. I probably wouldn't have read it if I knew that's all it was going to be. And then so far, this second chapter, I mean, I guess it is important because it is laying context and it is laying the stage for. I don't know what he's going to say, but it does seem like he's doing a lot of build up for getting to Baudrillard.
Yeah, I guess, can you at least go to the table of contents there? I think we should, to do this justice, we better just run over the table of contents.
Yeah.
Because everything else I say is going to be either, well, because I've got a rant on my chest, but also I might be wrong, and I kind of just want to know.
We're almost halfway through the book, though.
We're almost halfway through the book? Okay. Listen, guy. What's his name? What's this author's name?
Buttmunch McCloskey? What's his
Buttmunch McCloskey. Listen.
I don't know.
Listen. I'm sure it was the publisher who twisted your arm to make it Baudrillard and McLuhan, or McLuhan and Baudrillard. But it should have been McLuhan and French theory.
Yeah.
Come on.
So,
which is also legit. You know what I mean? That's legit. That would have been fine. I'm not saying that's a diss, but it's false advertising. I thought this was going to be some serious engagement between these two thinkers.
So the next section, the Empire Cazeneuve, is language electric. Chapter 3, Mac spell, Mac, ma. That's probably going to have something to do with alphabetics and phonetics, I think. Seems like it anyway. Chapter 4, massage and semiurgy. Again, like all this is just McLuhan.
Semiurgy, isn't that going to be Derrida? I don't know. That doesn't sound like...
Yeah, it's massage, massage.
Yeah.
And semiurgy, which, yeah.
I think
more
that's...
Derrida.
Yeah.
Panic, semiurgy, and sign work. More Derrida, more semiotics. Chapter 5, more McLuhan than McLuhan. That might be Baudrillard. More human than human, more McLuhan than McLuhan. Maybe, I doubt it. Writing symbolic exchange, that's Baudrillard. What is participation? The masters of implosion. So maybe chapter 5 has the Baudrillard in it. Maybe. And that's it. Chapter 5 is the last chapter. So, oh no, it's not. I take it back. Chapter 6, galaxies of simulacra. That's Baudrillard, but that's a short chapter. So,
all right, so 5 and 6, and then maybe the introduction, which is where I think they called him Dark McLuhan.
Yeah.
But Baudrillard also gets kind of sidelined by the French, especially after a certain point they stop engaging with him because he was too post-left. And so, or just too black-pilled, we might say, but, or he's too hyperbolic. There's a lot of things that I could see them taking issue with. There's a lot of reasons why they stopped mentioning him. But we didn't. We never stopped. And so the real question is, McLuhan and Baudrillard, how do they relate? I guess chapters 5 and 6 are probably going to get into it, so I'm excited for that. But this is also just kind of like, oh, this ain't the book. This is not the book that I was hoping it would be.
Yeah.
I don't regret anything we've done here. This has all been a great way of spending time.
Yeah, I like juxtaposing, or not juxtaposing, but I like engaging through this French theory. I like engaging with McLuhan through the lens of French theory and continental theory, maybe, because the English assholes are also being assholes.
100%.
But yeah, I was a little more stoked because Baudrillard and McLuhan are both sexy names. I have been trying to figure out how do they fit together, because it's a puzzle piece, or it's a jigsaw puzzle, and I've been trying to figure out how do they fit together, and does something else need to be added to it?
There is a relation.
I think something else does need to be added to it, but that's beside the point right now.
There's something there, we just don't know what.
Yeah, and we want to figure it out because it is critical fucking media theory.
Yeah, dude. And that's the thing, is I'm not getting a whole lot of critical media theory from this author. What I did see is the author kind of lightly touch on how McLuhan isn't very political or disavows how political he actually is.
Yeah.
Kind of touched on these aspects of like power and means of production and shit like that, but it did nothing with it. And so I just have to say, if like normal media theory people and or guys like Andrew McLuhan who don't study theory, that's not their wheelhouse, are to tune into it via a book like this, they're gonna walk away going, nothing burgers. That's all that is. Nothing burgers all the way down. Who gives a shit? We can tell you why we give a shit. I don't think this author has really told us why he gives a shit.
Yeah.
And once again, it's probably because we skipped the introduction, which is fine. But I realized, you know what? I like to skip prefaces. I like to skip introductions. But I think there's a revision to the general rule there, and it became clear on this one. And that is that when it's a collection of essays, the introduction is like what ties it all together. And if there's an afterword. So we'll probably have to also read the introduction, because that's probably where the fucking meat and potatoes is at. But 5 and 6, it sounds like we'll come back to 5 and 6.
Yeah, for sure.
For sure.
Read the introduction and then 5 and 6.
And then my last question for you, Dance, was did you get the impression from what you're reading? Because I can't see the quotations and shit like that, but did you get the impression from what you're reading that Derrida is actively engaging with McLuhan, or is this author forcing that?
I think this guy's forcing it.
Okay. Then good.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. The whole thing about these guys trying to act like Derrida's of grammatology is somehow like deeper than like understanding media. I just have to say, like, that seems a little nutso to me. Like, I don't see how Derrida's saying, hey, there's a writing before speech in archaic writing in any way, shape, or form poses a problem for McLuhan. That's just people. This is like superficial opposition bullshit. They're not really tarrying with the differences here.
Right. Or or even really engaging. That like it is just staying on this spectacular. That was cool looking.
I just saw the dopest lightning strike.
But yeah. It's like, oh, I'm from Team Blue and you're from Team Red and we have a beef, and let's not really ever engage with even our own arguments. Let's just do the red team, blue team thing. Right.
Now, to the author, who, by the way, we do need the name.
Greg. Or Gary.
Gary, Indiana.
Gary Janowski, I think. Janosko?
Listen, Jerry Janosko, if you're watching this, or if your kids are watching, if anybody who likes you or cares about you is watching, I just want you to know.
Good job.
I think my issue is only with the publisher kind of doing some clickbait with the title, and it's misleading. Outside of that, though, what I admire about what you do here is that you are taking things that are not really supposed to go together, and you're putting them together, and you're showing that they do go together, and you're also showing that there's all these other people whose names we don't even know who are like trying to gatekeep and say that we can't put these things together, and you're pointing that out, and that's important. It's really, really useful. And you're really trying to tarry with all these different French influences on Baudrillard in relation to McLuhan, and you've gone so deep in it that you actually like are looking at like unknown letter exchanges and like notes and margins, and I just think that that's some serious sleuthing and definitely archival work that, you know, has to be acknowledged. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Gary Janosko.
Good job.
Yeah, kindred spirits, man.
Yeah.
Good job.
Yeah, we'd love to talk to you someday if you're still around. All right, peace. Oh, P.S. Did anybody make it this far? Let us know in the comment section down below. I know the like, subscribe thing gets tired and old, but it makes a difference. Ring the damn bell.
Like and subscribe.
Go to Theory Underground and make a fucking post about what you thought about that book.
Yeah, and if you're not,
https://theoryunderground.com.
That's right. And if become a tier 1, 2, or 3 subscriber if you really want to access like all the other cool shit that we do on a regular basis. We do readings like this all the time. We've got all kinds of social clubs. We do a film club, a sci-fi reading book club, a writer's workshop club, Shakespeare club, for general theater theme. We've got Spanish, French, German, immersion, as well as other forms of multilingualism. Get outside your comfort zone, get lost and fuck around with us. Just get outside of English. It's a virtue in itself, whether or not you become proficient someday. But no, as far as this whole text goes, is there something about it that stuck out to you that we didn't talk about? Is there something that you're wondering that you want to address or that you would like us to address? Is there anything here that is useful for your work or that has you wondering things that's going to make you want to go do some research on your own? Let us know in the comment section. All right, peace.
We cannot do direct revolution, but the only way to lay the foundation for it is to do what you are doing to move the underground. It's a theoretically correct title.
Welcome to Theory Underground, a place for workers with earbuds who are tired of the bullshit and just want to get down to it. Big ideas, rigorous thinking, and ultimately liberation from necessity.
Research at Theory Underground focuses on what is most important for understanding our current situation. Theory of the subject, capital, time-energy theory, critical media theory, CMT, and the most essential critiques necessary for understanding why the theory, ideology, and common sense of influencers left to right misses the mark.
Theory Underground is coming to a city near you. Besides a commitment to publishing certain underground theorists and popularizing certain fundamental concepts, we have toured the United States and are touring Europe to promote our ideas, courses, and publications.
You've been reading Underground Theory.
Amazing book. I'm a publisher and an editor. I run and review books. Literally, it's my living. This is the best edited collection I've ever read.
Okay, picture this scene. America, early 2021. An Amazon warehouse worker arises from the emerging underground theory internet scene to create spaces for untimely topics and concerns that are too often neglected or kept in isolation today. Joined by a revolving cast of underground theorists, academics, and critics, he establishes what will become Theory Underground, a teaching, research, and publishing platform by and for working-class intellectuals, autodidacts, and academics who want to do more than they're able to do within the confines of academia. That warehouse worker's name is David McKerracher, and his book Timenergy is his first major contribution to the world of theory. It was recently reprinted with a foreword by none other than Slavoj Žižek, who also contributed to Theory Underground's latest book.
My Bible, it's an excellent book.
A collection of essays called Underground Theory.
What you just heard is an excerpt from the Strange Exiles podcast, episode 23, where Bram from Strange Exiles interviewed me and Mikey. For those who don't know, Mikey is the author of the Dangerous Maybe blog. We are publishing one of his books here shortly at Theory Underground. He's also a lecturer at Theory Underground, and he's someone I've been friends and a collaborator with for over 10 years. But most importantly for you all, he's a fantastic lecturer, and it's a crime that he has to do wage labor right now. One of the long-term goals of Theory Underground has been now for a couple of years to hashtag free Mikey. That is something that I've been really pushing, but first, obviously, I have to get freed myself, so the two of us are able to do this because, as Mikey said, build it and they will come. Well, I tried and I built a website and platform. I had my own app and everything, but it's been really buggy and it's more than one person can handle, and that's, a really good lesson for me. And so for now, what we're doing is moving it to a temporary intermediary platform until we are able to get some more serious funding. And ultimately, we want to be in a place like this, a real brick and mortar digital nomadic mecca where people can come from all over the world. But also, the app was really expensive, and so by quitting it, I am now able to save a lot of money, and with the help of my patrons and the students at Theory Underground, especially the monthly subscribers, I am officially able to quit Amazon and do Theory Underground full time. So thank you so much, everybody. This is one huge step forward With that said, several subscribers did not migrate from the now defunct app to the new setup, and I'm guaranteed to lose people over time. So please, if you want to get involved, become a subscriber. If you're not even sure what this is all about but are just curious, then I've added Tier 0 and Tier 1 for very basic kinds of access to what we are doing behind the scenes. If you don't have any time or energy to get involved, but you do have some money to help support this project from afar, then please check out the Patreon. My patrons over at Patreon make the podcast and public YouTube possible. Thank you. As for once-in-a-lifetime events, check out the new poster for the American Idiots Theory Underground European Book Tour. Paris, Brussels, Berlin, Vienna, Linz, Krakow, Glasgow, London, and Oxford from April 27th to May 25th, 2024. 2 events are already fully booked out. Save a seat at an event by getting in contact with us ASAP. Finally, the call for proposals to our conference in Mexico.
What's up, everybody? TUCon 2024 update here. It's not happening in Mexico anymore, but it is still happening on October 24th through the 27th.
The change was made because a lot of the people that wanted to attend and that were expected to attend said they could probably afford to travel if they had more time advance notice. So save up for June 2025.
If you have to choose, right? Because this one that is happening this year is happening physically in Boise, Idaho, because we have a lot of collaborators and fellow travelers and co-instructors there. But you can attend virtually for this one. You won't be able to attend virtually next year. So yeah, if you have to choose, attend physically in 2025. The call for proposals already happened. The writing workshop for proposals already happened. You can still get the links to both of those. Just shoot us a message and ask for those links. We'll get you those. And the form goes live on June 1st, and the deadline is June 15th. So if you're attending physically, let me know ASAP.
Get in on it.
All right. Finally, last little thing here is to say thank you so much to my patrons over at Patreon. The Patreon is for people who are too busy to be students or subscribers at Theory Underground, but who want to see more of this free content on the podcast and YouTube channel for Theory Underground. You are the ones who see something of value in the free content being made available here, and you want to see more of it. Your patron pledges at Patreon are a real motivator for me, so thank you so much. Especially thanks to Marilyn Lawrence, Bert Vanderkar, Carl Vanderlip, Nikolai, Sahil Kumar, Zuxandra, Darian Large, Tyler Murphy, Max Mackin, Al, Algeri, Ben Rosenbluth, Atlantic Airlines, Lewis, Matt Payne, Neil C., Simon Condon, Yiz, and Schwabkinson. Thank you.